Hope sent a quiver. Written by OrionLady on AO3, read by Alextris. Chapter 2. Later that night, after Nate's dramatic retelling of the ice cream shop and all the dogs he got to pet at the park, when he'd talked himself into a sleepy slur of a little boy, Clint tugged him up into his arms and walked him around the downstairs while he shut off lights and locked doors. Nate's legs wrapped around his ribcage. He planted a sloppy kiss on Clint's 5 o'clock shadow. More like 9 o'clock at this point. "Lay you, Dad." Clint held him tight, rocking them back and forth, letting himself have this moment to be reminded that not all stories ended in heartbreak. He couldn't even imagine his kids homeless in the woods like that. "Love you too, son." Clint kissed Nate's messy waves. "You're the best." He checked on Lila, already asleep, and Cooper, playing video games at his PC. "Don't stay up too late." Cooper saluted. "You got it, Daddy-o." "Wise guy." Cooper smirked. He paused his game to glance up at Clint, more specifically at Nate conked out on his hip. "Everything okay today? It's not like Mum to let him skip school." "All good, just—" Clint debated how transparent to be. "Well, son, we have a beaten teenager living in the woods outside our house, and he's terrified of men to the point he injured himself trying to get away from me. But no worries." "No." Clint mentally shook his head at himself. That wouldn't go over well, for multiple reasons. "Just some issues with the sensors. I've been fixing them." Cooper relaxed back into his rolling chair. He was the only child of their three to know about some of the installed security precautions. "All good now?" "Should be. I'll check again in the morning." "Okay. Night, Dad." "Night, Coop. Don't let the other sniper team win." "You got it." Clint closed Cooper's door. 2 down, 1 to go. Nate already wore his pajamas, but once in his room, Clint found himself reluctant to place him in the dinosaur-themed bed. My kids. A shudder ran through Clint, and he cupped the back of Nate's head. He squeezed his eyes shut to block out the tears he never let fall, but one slipped down his nose right onto the boy's mop. He'd been given so much. What right did he have to cry? At least he got his family back. Not everyone had been so lucky, and yet the hollow real estate of Clint's soul demanded he wring out like a day-old sponge. He'd resisted it for almost 2 years. He wasn't about to start now if he could help it. But holding Nathaniel, holding his baby, every dream for 5 years was right here, in his arms, in this house. Clint couldn't marry that to the traumatized boy outside. "Love you," he whispered to Nate. "Love you so much. Love you, son." Clint had to say it another 10 times before he worked up the nerve to place Nate down, tuck the comforter around him, and step away. Laura sat up in their bedroom reading some historical fiction book about Amelia Earhart. Clint flopped down beside her after tugging off his jeans. Once sure his eyes wouldn't betray him, he opened them. Laura already peered over him, her hair a waterfall around his face. "Long day?" "You have no idea." "How did it go?"
"About as well as you'd expect, maybe worse. I'm still not sure on that point."
Laura shut off the light and snuggled down so they faced each other in the dark. "What's he like?" Clint let her take his hand and play with the lifeline.
"Quiet, filthy. One of his Converse has a hole in the toe. He looked at me like I was going to kill him."
Laura gripped his hand hard but didn't say anything.
"I can't explain it, Law." Clint breathed shaky. "Something about him."
"Dad instinct?"
"Maybe. Not really, but yeah, kinda."
Clint kissed between her eyes.
"He'll probably be gone tomorrow anyway. I spooked him good."
"So you decided to just let him have his space? No phone calls? No drugging him to sneak him into the car for a hospital trip?" Not exactly an accusation, but Clint felt Laura's incredulity in his own chest. All her questions he'd asked himself on a never-ending cycle for the remainder of the day.
"Didn't really have a choice. I couldn't get within 10 feet of the kid without him shaking apart like a rivet plane. Clint could have, physically speaking. They both remembered the turkey dinner fiasco of '02, when Clint sedated Laura's raving Uncle Robert, drunk and deliriously off his meds, from halfway across the room, using nothing but a Christmas cracker as a blow dart. An underfed teenage boy was a joke by comparison. But Laura was ever a saint and understood what he meant. Her eyes shone now. Poor thing. He had bruises, Laura. Broken bones too, probably. Clint's rage blended into a lava soup with dismay. We saved the world, and people are still hurting kids. Laura wrapped her beautiful arms around him. He nosed into her collarbone. Can't save everyone all at once. One day at a time, Clint. Just one day. One person at a time. You want to take out your hearing aid? Old question. Clint shook his head. The thought of total silence, into which the sound of Nat's body hitting the ground, or Tony's last gurgling breath, could echo in full stereo, sent his heart racing. Same answer. Okay, baby. Laura ran her hands through his hair. One night at a time. Clint finally relaxed into her hold, the thump of her pulse a lullaby across the bridge of his nose. They fell into the heavy sleep of those too appreciative of the uneventful quiet to waste it. Black leotard, pink leg warmers, old and fainted point shoes. Clint spotted these first upon stepping into his kitchen, or a version of his kitchen. No clutter on the coffee table or dirty dishes in the sink, no dinosaur toys by the window. Moonlight hung over the room in a crystal aurora. This is a step up from my nightmares. Natasha glanced away from a container between her crisscrossed legs on the countertop. Long crimson hair tumbled around her arms, a poppy flower river that shimmered like the day he first met her. Hey, you're late. Hello to you too. Had to fend off the others for hours waiting for you. Couldn't stay asleep at first. Clint looked around. Others? Nat recalibrated, oldest expression in the book with her, a look Clint suspected she had innately, as a child, not even instilled by the Red Room, assessing her options and acting accordingly. I suppose it might not have been hours. It's hard to tell now. Clint hopped up onto the sink adjacent to her corner of the counter. No braid? Don't need it. My hair never gets caught in things like the old days. Clint smiled. Your one act of rebellion against your handlers not to cut it. Nat smiled too, a tender, less cynical one he'd seldom seen. A glimpse into younger Natasha, and the way she was always meant to be on the inside. People hardly ever outwardly lived the lives playing out on the inside, their authentic sincerity. To see it now felt both uncanny and like the first taste of spring air after a dry winter. You won't open my shoebox. The room quivered. Clint swallowed in time with the wooden block of Nat's shoe tapping on the counter. Don't really need to, now do I? Get enough of that in the house. You and Tony are everywhere there, inescapable. The steady rove of Nat's eyes over his features steadied the shaking, for it was also familiar beyond reason. Clint flapped an arm. The living room, the woodshed, the barn where you chased a raccoon out of the toolbox, the basement rec room, and your stupid Boy Meets World boxed sets. Haven't sold those. Could make a fortune with nostalgic millennials. Can't bring myself to. Huh. And you still can't sleep. Not a question. Clint thumbed a crack on the edge of the counter, the way it had been since they bought the place, and Laura dropped a hammer during their renovations, 4 months pregnant with Cooper and startled by his kicking. Sometimes I don't feel any different when I'm asleep versus awake. Everything's grey. Stars in the window behind Nat flared brighter, just enough to halo them both in refracted diamond lights. Lights of stars long dead, like the pair of them in this non-existent kitchen. Sleep is for people at peace, said Nat. Clint lost the beat of her shoe for a moment. I wouldn't know. Nat played with the container lid. She flipped it open a hair, and warmth swept through the room, all the way into Clint's paws and down his tendons. The hollow pit in his chest softened for a moment. He shook himself. Just stopping by? Wanted a late-night snack. More disgusting frozen yogurt? Oh, but of course. Is there anything else? There should be, Clint mumbled. Nat frowned and suddenly snapped the lid shut, staring at the bay window across from the sink. Clint did too, and from one heartbeat to the next, it was open. Just a crack. About the width of Clint's thumb, cold midnight air replaced the warmth. Not a lot, but enough to chase away the joy of moments earlier. I always lock that window, said Clint. It'll be cold enough to hibernate in here soon if you're not careful. The choice of words zapped Clint. He sat straighter, trying to play off the judder in his stomach with a smirk. I suppose a spider would know. Nat hugged the tub against her chest and eyed Clint with so much compassion it stole all his breath. Yes, we do. So will you before the end. Tap, 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 tap. Nat's toe beat out the rhythm of a long-forgotten song. One Clint had heard before, in the echoes of skipped rocks and a laugh and a barbecue and a too big black suit. One that had made all the heartbreak make sense. One he strained so desperately to hear that he leaned forward, lost his balance. Tush, tap, 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 tap. Cold, cold. Clint woke from a dead sleep to this blaring thought. He lay still, disoriented. With Laura draped all over him and 3 blankets, he was toasty warm. Cold. Blanket. Blanket? What? Blanket? Blanket! Clint gently but hurriedly extracted himself from Laura, handing her his pillow to clutch, and yanked on sweatpants. He didn't even bother with shoes, just grabbed the comforter off the guest room bed. He only balked for a split second this time, an improvement from the last few attempts to enter it, and bolted down the stairs. Murky lighting promised dawn not far off. Barely 6 a.m. It refracted through the mist from the patches of warm earth and puddles, through spider webs laced in the grass. Clint didn't bother with any form of secrecy this round. He ran through the woods and made the trip in just over 4 minutes. His breath steamed in white cotton puffballs, soil chilly against his bare arches. Please be here, he begged, all breath. Please, please, please still be here, please. Clint rounded the oak tree and collapsed over his knees. A cement block of relief slammed into his chest at the kid's wan face, smoothed in sleep. The garbage bag clearly wasn't cutting it, his lips blue and flying shivers making the plastic bag quiver. Ah, kid. Even at Clint's sotto voice exclamation, he didn't stir. This isn't healthy. Would the boy appreciate waking up later, seeing the comforter and realizing Clint had stood over him while he was vulnerable? Would that drive him away even more? A gamble either way, to leave the kid here and risk him potentially dying in his sleep from the elements, or wrap him in warmth and risk him running away. That was the question. Clint decided he didn't care and draped the comforter over the boy. One quick moment of indulgence only he allowed himself. To tuck in the edges a few inches away from the boy's form. Surgical precision not to jostle the hammock. After a moment, the boy's shivers lessened, and his tense mouth went lax. Clint huffed at the sudden release of anxiety in the pit of his stomach. Let the kid be mad or scared later. At least right now, he'd be warm enough. That was his highest need for the moment, along with a good meal. The comforter was designed for a twin bed, so it hung off the hammock, but didn't touch the ground. Clint tugged it all the way up until it covered the kid's white ear, delta of veins popped in its shell. Hypothermia averted, Clint leaned against the birch by the boy's head. You've got to leave him be. He's just going to disappear in a few days, on the run from something. I don't care, Clint whispered, staunch as the last time he'd said the words to Natasha all those years ago. It matters now. The sandwich hadn't been touched or eaten. but now it lay beside the boy's backpack in the hammock. Clint's lips twitched. One person at a time indeed. If he'd learned nothing else from the 46 years on this planet, it was to take wins where you could get them. Someone handed Clint another stupid hero medal. He made it through the rest of the day without going back to the woods once, not even in the evening. Laura didn't hand him a hero medal, but she did make out with him by the stove before the teens got home, while Nate was playing outside with his chickens, so that certainly made up for the loss. "You are such a good man," she murmured in his ear, which wasn't very hot, but it did make Clint ache with love for her, so much he thought it might stop his heart one of these days. "Lived through the ringer, and you still care so much." "Couldn't without you." He said it almost before the words finished leaving her mouth. "Sap? Enabler?" Laura bit his lip. "I'd argue with that, but there's a reason I nudged you into the counter corner." Clint quirked a brow. "Not letting me escape, Madam Barton?" "Never." "Wouldn't want to even if you did." Clint kissed her and winked. Little feet skipped into the room. "I hear the evidence of that love now." Nate ran over to hug his father's legs, even though he'd seen him barely 20 minutes ago, oblivious to their flushed faces. "Dad, Peppa picked Nellie." "Again?" Clint rested a palm on Nate's ear. "That's not very nice." "Pippa's being a bully." Clint gave a hyperbole gasp. "We can't have that. Maybe Dad should go have a talk with our resident hen picker." "Yeah." Clint was kind of kidding, but Nate's little brow had accordion folded, so that's how Clint found himself out in the chicken coop, having a stern talk with the speckled hen. She looked bemused to be held level with his eye. Clint put on a watered-down version of his Hawkeye interrogation voice just for spice. "And it's important we get along if we're to make this family work. A tough order, I know. One lady gets in a jab at the other, and it spirals out of control." Clint wagged a finger, and Nate nodded along in all the right places. "We need eggs, and you need shelter, food, and heat lamps to live. So really, I think you have the better end of the deal here." "Nellie is smaller than you," Nate added. "We can't use our strengths to hurt people. That's what Daddy says." Clint smiled down at Nate. "Exactly, bud. No matter what we have or what we can do, should always be used to help rather than control people." Upon being set down on her sharp feet, Pippa squawked up at Clint and scampered away. Nellie now laying contentedly on her bed. The red and white coop, hand-built, teemed with their 5 hens, heading out for the day down the ramp and into the spacious pen. "All good, chicken manager?" Nate popped a thumb up. "All good now." Clint led them back to the coop gate and latched it once they were out on the greener grass. "Hey, Nate, what's your favourite food? What's comforting to eat when you're feeling sick or sad?" Nate held Clint's hand on the walk back. "I like chocolate milk." Not exactly breaking news. When sick, or on a road trip, or for any occasion really, Nate always asked for chocolate milk. "What else?"
"Waffles, duh."
"Duh," Clint echoed. "Waffles are life."
"Ooh, and chicken nuggets."
Clint staggered back as if struck. "Don't let the hens hear you say that." Nate broke down into belly laughs. He swung from Clint's arm, and Clint deadlifted him in their usual monkey tree game. The boy's light-up sneakers flashed when Clint bobbed him along the sandy part of the path, then over a big stack of lumber by the woodshed.
"But the best food is pizza."
"Yeah?"
"It's got bread and cheese and bacon."
Nate's voice shrilled with excitement on the last word.
"Sometimes we get stuffed crust or sun-dried tomatoes on top, and that's the best, Dad."
"You are so right, Nate man." Clint's mind whirred. Pizza is the best. Which is how Clint found himself walking through the woods the next day with a take-out pizza box under one arm, like a delivery guy for Tarzan. The smell of hot cardboard and tomato sauce felt incongruous in the forest to blow,
But Clint forged ahead. His face fell when he reached the hammock and saw it completely empty. No teenage boy, no backpack. Kid? Clint spun in a circle. He listened hard for any sounds and hardly blinked in his study of the surrounding forest. Nothing. Kid, you here? I brought more food. You don't have to hide, it's okay. The sandwich had been nibbled at, its plastic wrap balled up at the base of the hammock, bread rinds left inside. The boy didn't like crusts, maybe, just like Cooper. Clint sighed and ran a hand through his hair. Everything ached in a way that had nothing to do with his body or joints. What am I doing that? Thinking he'd still be here? That's for amateurs. Wishful thinking pitted against experience. I'm going crazy after all. Clint nestled the pizza in the hammock, the best evidence for how much he'd completely lost it, since it was probably the world's dumbest idea, unless he wanted to attract flocks of animals and insects. But some tiny moronic part of him held out hope that the kid might come back, or out of his hiding spot. He wouldn't leave without his hammock, right? A sticky note lay on top for just this occasion, in Clint's uneven lowercase style. Stay warm, kid. Hope this helps. Throwing himself into his kids' lives turned out to be a lot easier than sitting around fretting about a boy he'd never technically spoken to. Besides, Clint had never been a moper, preferring action. And so, that's what he did for the next 2 days. A spot of excellent timing, since Lila needed help with her science project on molecules, which involved lots of manipulating styrofoam balls and toilet paper tubes, and Coop wanted advice on college applications. There's no rush for that, you know, said Clint one night, sitting backwards on Cooper's desk chair. Cooper shrugged from his place on the end of the bed. All my friends are suddenly 5 years older than me. It's lonely at high school. At least in uni, I'd be closer to familiar faces. But is getting a degree what you want? If it is, I'm with you all the way, buddy. Cooper didn't speak for a long moment. Clint swiveled back and forth in the chair. This, at least, felt blissfully familiar. Cooper was an old soul in a young man's body, always mentally years ahead of his peers, slow to smile but quick to help, compassionate in the unseen gestures like cleaning up after Nate's spilled cup and folding laundry for Laura when she forgot about it in the dryer, hugging for a long time rather than lots of quick ones. I've been debating about it, said Cooper. Debating between what? Cooper fiddled with his hands. Torn between art school or becoming a cop. Clint stopped swiveling. His chin lifted off the back of his wrists. A cop? Where's this coming from? The art wasn't a surprise. Cooper had talked about studying game design or visual effects for years. He had the creature design sketches taped over his laptop to prove it. But a cop? I've seen how broken my classmates' lives are at school. Some of them anyway. All from stuff that could have been prevented if law enforcement or administrative groups had more help. Clint's Adam's apple bobbed. Okay. 2 horse. He tried again. I'm mildly freaking out, but also proud that you want to help people. Any other way you can do so that doesn't involve guns? Cooper canted his head. That's the part I'm debating about. I'm not naive enough to think it would be an easy career choice. I know you've dedicated your life to making sure we never feel unsafe. Hit the nail on the head, Coop. But I also can't control your decisions once you turn 18, nor would I want to. You deserve to have a purpose and fulfillment in life, even if it makes me sweat bullets. A faint smile wormed over Cooper's face. If you have any alternative suggestions, I'm open. I just think cops have the most on-ground access to helping people in trouble. The everyday trials, not what you do. Clint snorted. What I used to do. Semi-retired, remember? Still don't know what semi entails. Short of the world ending, or being threatened by giant robots again, I'm off duty in that capacity. Cooper eyed him. No undercover missions around the world for the government? Clint appreciated that he could look his son in the eye and say with 100% accuracy, "Not for lack of trying on S.H.I.E.L.D.'s part, but no. I've turned them all down for now." Okay. That seemed to settle something in Cooper's mind. Maybe I can apply for both schools and see which one accepts me. Clint stood and ruffled Cooper's straight locks. That's a smart plan. They'd better accept you if they know what's good for them. Yeah, I'll keep dreaming. You do that, said Clint, serious as the plague. I helped undo the snap so you could dream of whatever life you want. Seeing you weigh your many choices is its own reward. Cooper didn't reply, but gratitude gleamed in his dark eyes. Later, cuddling with Laura in front of the TV, Lila's head on his knee, asleep, Clint tried to picture his son in a police uniform. Physiologically 5 years younger than his classmates. 5 whole years missing from the thread of time he'd never get back. A cop. Laura smiled without looking away from How I Met Your Mother. It played on low and outlined their faces in pinkish light. You heard about that? Told me before supper. Clint massaged his fingers through Lila's hair, downed for once. She would be 19. 19! If the blip hadn't happened. I never thought about how hard it must be for them, socially. Lila's lucky in that 2 of her good friends got dusted along with her. They can go to school together. With Cooper, it's different for him, even without the insanity of the last year or so. A thinker, that one. Laura laid her head on Clint's shoulder. They're adjusting really well, all things considered. It's because they've got such a great mum and unlimited access to the cookie dough ice cream you think I don't know about. Laura stifled her laugh in his shirt to keep from waking their daughter. Busted. Everyone needs some comfort, stability. Even more so in times like this. I'm glad it's helped the kids. Yeah. Clint's mind strayed to a mute boy sleeping under the stars tonight. To a shoebox in his closet that he couldn't bring himself to look at. Stability.